Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ILN Talk Show, a free space to discuss different developments in Muslim majority countries and beyond. And this is our eighth ILN Talk Show, but it's the first time we're having a female guest, and I'm really happy about this. I'm so happy to introduce Miss Aira Azhari, who is working now as manager of the Democracy and Governance Unit at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas based in Malaysia. Ms. Azhari, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So we're going to be talking about Malaysia, the political scene in Malaysia, and everything related to it. So your role at Ideas requires you to provide political analysis and various, for various audiences, including political parties, diplomats, the media, the corporate sector, as well as civil society organizations. So you're quite an expert. So based on this, I wanted to ask you about what is the political landscape in Malaysia, looks like right now. Has it evolved since the last 3 years, since the GE in 2018, the general elections, and ever since Mahathir Mohamad came back to the scene?
Thank you, Tasnim. So, since the 14 general elections that happened on the 9th of May in 2018, there has been significant political developments in Malaysia. So, the 2018 elections itself was already very, very significant, right? Because it was the first time that the coalition, the Barisan National Coalition, was unseated from power since our independence in 1957. So, and then the new coalition that came into power, Pakatan Harapan, I think a lot of reform-minded Malaysians and were very, very happy with their victory and had very high expectations of the policies and of their governance when they came into power. And it was to some extent, it was a progressive government. I would say it was multiracial. They had a multiracial cabinet. And they were very, very enthusiastic to some extent, to some degree, on institutional reforms, on democratic openings in the country. Unfortunately, they were only in power for 22 months, so they didn't complete even 2 years of administration before in February 2020 there was a series of backdoor negotiations and dealings that resulted in the collapse of the government in February last year of 2020. And since then, I think there has been a lot of uncertainty in our political scene, and the latest I guess change is happened in August of this year of 2021. No, sorry, September of this year actually.
Okay.
With the swearing in of the new another new prime minister, Ismail Sabri, who came into power, and this was the result of the former prime minister actually losing support by his members of parliament, and he then had to step down and make way for a new prime minister. So we've actually had two changes of government in the last year, not through elections, right? So I think this has actually become very significant in Malaysia, and calls into question a lot of things about electoral politics, democratic norms, independent institutions, and a lot of Malaysians, I think, are now starting to question what is the point of voting, right? If the government can just be changed without the people's mandate. So all of these fundamental questions about democracy are coming into question, and all of this is happening, of course, in the midst of a pandemic, where
I was just gonna ask you about this.
Yes.
How has the pandemic and its management especially affected the political situation in Malaysia?
Yeah, so in during the first change last year in February, this was right at the moment when COVID-19 hit Malaysian shores. So, and at the time, COVID was still very new. We didn't really know much about it. We thought that it was going to be over and done with in a few months,
like everybody else.
like everybody else, right? I mean, little did we know that it was only going to get worse. So it started to get really, really bad in Malaysia at the end of last year. I think it was October or November of 2020 when we
Mm-hmm.
had our second wave. That really, I think, pushed many Malaysians over the edge and made many Malaysians very, very unhappy with the government's handling of the pandemic. And we have increased numbers of deaths were increasing every day, and hospitals and our healthcare system was very, very overwhelmed.
And
So I
the
think that
lockdown as
that
well,
contributed.
repetitive
Sorry, the
lockdowns.
lockdown. Yes,
Yeah.
and of course the repeated lockdowns has affected many households. People have lost jobs and all of that. So that, I think, contributed to the previous prime minister's unpopularity, and the reason, part of the reason why I think he lost a lot of support and had to step down. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay,
yeah.
so we're going to move to something related to this, but not exactly, but still on the realm of politics. So earlier this month, on the Vibes.com, you actually took part in an article entitled Public Funding for Political Parties, a Start but Not a Panacea. And as we know, public political funding is a system where parties receive public funds to cover their costs without relying too much on, private donors. So, to quote you words, you actually stated that some parties may not need public political funding as much. The money these parties may get from public funds will not be as much as they can get from the other networks. So, do you think that the information regarding private donors are easily extracted from certain political parties in Malaysia? I mean, could we say that there is transparency in Malaysia?
Uh, so I would say when it comes to transparency in political funding, I would say that it's almost non-existent in Malaysia.
Okay.
We actually do not have a law that regulates money in politics. So there is no compulsion, or there is no political parties are in no way obligated by the law to
Mm-hmm.
disclose the sources of their fundings. There is, the in the Election Offences Act, there is just like one clause that says election candidates need to only spend a certain amount and then declare that. But even then, that is not enforced very strictly. So we do not have laws that regulate political funding, basically. So this is what ideas and many other NGOs, CSOs, think tanks in Malaysia are fighting for, to
Mm-hmm.
have or to legislate a law on political funding in Malaysia. And during the Pakatan Harapan administration, this was one of their manifesto promises. But of course, they didn't manage to table it in parliament, right? So this is
Mm-hmm.
something that we're working very, very hard on, because uh, political opaque sources of political funding is a huge source of political corruption in
Absolutely.
Malaysia. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I know, the case of 1MDB with the previous Prime Minister Najib Razak became global headlines, and that is just, I think, still just one case out of, we don't know how many other cases like that are there
Yeah.
in Malaysia. Yeah, so um when we don't know where politicians get money from, then that opens the doors to many other things like money laundering, corruption. The Pandora Papers recently revealed, this network of offshore accounts by
Yeah.
very, very rich individuals and politicians around the world, right? So, I think public funding, going back to the article that you quoted,
Yeah.
is a system that we are trying to advocate for several reasons. Firstly, I think this idea of public funding of parties has been getting some traction amongst politicians in Malaysia. So
Mm-hmm.
it is in a way, um, if we can get one foot through the door by getting public funding passed, then we can open the door to a lots of other reforms.
Sure.
And with public funding comes an obligation of transparency. So because public funding comes from taxpayers money, so political parties then absolutely must be transparent about how they spend that money on. So it is a in a way it is a good it is a good method to compel parties to be transparent with funding. And but there are different systems all around the world. Germany
Yeah.
has the system, South Korea has a different system. So we're not too sure about the technicalities yet on how it can be implemented in Malaysia. But there are several issues that we need to take into account. Like in Malaysia, for example, because UMNO was in power for so long, ever since independence,
Mm-hmm.
so they have managed to accumulate a lot of wealth, and they have very well-known business networks that then makes them a very wealthy party. And then there are other political parties which are much newer, much smaller, that do not have much sources of funding. So we need
Mm-hmm.
to take all of this into account when we are thinking about political funding. Yeah.
Absolutely. So before going into the technicalities of implementing this law, if ever it happens, do you think the political parties, especially the big ones, are accepting this? Are they accepting this, or are they resisting it? Is there any discussion taking place now in Malaysia about this?
Yes, so I would say that the a party like UMNO, for example, has come out in the quite recently, saying that they are open to transparency and to accountability in political funding. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is motivated by many factors. So one of them is the 1MDB case, of course, I think tarnished their image, I think, amongst many Malaysians, their image internationally. And then, so many of their own leaders are being prosecuted in court because of cases involving money politics. So either money laundering or breach of trust or tax evasion. So
Mm-hmm.
they themselves know that because the system is unregulated, they then also become trapped by the system, because they might be raising funds for legitimate reasons to fund their political activities, but then there is no way to declare that, because there is no
Mm-hmm.
law. So they then get caught in all these other things. So I think they have started to realize the importance of this, and which is good, right? So from our perspective, the
Yeah.
more politicians talk about it, and the more politicians realize the importance of transparency, that means that the political will might increase, and we might see
Yeah.
politicians themselves pushing for it, which is what we need.
The more likely
Yeah,
it's gonna happen one day. Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
So we've been talking about the parties, but the parties are, in a way, a reflection of the citizens themselves, as far as corruption is concerned, right? So, in December
Mm-hmm.
2018, the then Malaysian Deputy Prime Minister Wan Azizah Ismail said that, according to the Transparency International Malaysia, about 4% of GDP was lost to corruption annually since 2013. And you actually commented on this. I've been stalking you, of course, on the net. Sorry about that.
Thank
You
you.
commented on this on the Sen Daily by saying that the people need to understand that giving and receiving bribes in return of favors and positions is unacceptable. That was in
Mm-hmm.
2018. 3 years later, where does Malaysia stand now as far as corruption is concerned, as far as the citizens are concerned, and of course the political parties?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question, right? Because when it comes to corruption, of course, you have the international indexes like the Corruption Perception Index, that ideas follows quite closely as well, to see how
Mm-hmm.
Malaysia's position, has it improved or has it changed. But we also realize that these indexes are also not the best or not the most accurate reflection of
Okay.
the situation on the ground. Um, and at the end of the day, corruption is something that is not very easy to measure. It is very, very complicated, it's very complex, it exists in different forms. So you have bribery, you have money laundering, you have fraud, and many, many other kinds of corrupt practices. So and
Mm-hmm.
you have individuals, you have politicians, and you have corporations, and
Yeah.
who are all capable of committing corruption. So it is not a very easy thing to measure. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, and the other thing about corruption as well, I mean, not just in Malaysia, I think, but in all around the world, is
Absolutely.
I think there is the institutional failures, like anti-corruption bodies, being influenced by politicians, not being
Mm-hmm.
independent, not having enough power. And then you have society where a lot of corruption then happens, not necessarily because people, there are bad people in society, but some people, some societies are uh probably just don't have enough food to put on their table, so they don't have any other option but to
Yeah.
accept bribes to just get on with their day-to-day life. So there are so many factors, right? And I think in Malaysia, the institutional factor is important to talk about, because this is also something that Ideas has done some research on. So the Malaysian
Mm-hmm.
Anti-Corruption Commission, for example, has their integrity and their independence has also, I think, come into question by many NGOs in the past. The the way that the commissioners in the MECC are appointed, the process is not as
Mm-hmm.
independent as it should be. And lately, actually, in the news, we have read about how MECC officers themselves are being caught for corrupt practices, which is really worrying, right? So you're supposed to be the body
Yeah.
that that oversees anti-corruption practices, and then you're being caught for corruption. So the institutional level, I think, is already quite problematic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is really important to consider. And then on the other hand, you also have societal factors where uh and I think the societal factors is a lot more difficult to quantify. Ideas actually recently did a paper or a piece of research about the cost of corruption. So
Okay.
and this was really important, because some of the findings include, corruption. If you have corruption in the construction sector, for example,
Yeah.
this significantly then raises the cost of housing, for example, because housing developers are forced to pay bribes to local authorities, to the government, and this cost is then passed down to the consumer, which is us. So we are actually paying for properties at prices that are actually a lot more expensive than they really are. So
Mm-hmm.
these are all the factors, I think. And right now, I think in 2021, I'm not sure actually if we have made much progress in terms of the institutional factor and also the societal factors. And and the solutions are also not easy. But I would say
Mm-hmm.
that the priority, I think, in Malaysia is actually for our institutions to be independent and to carry out their duties with integrity, because if we do not have that, then it is very difficult for combating corruption to happen. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where we are now. And I think, the thing about COVID also, I think it has distracted a bit the
Things
discussion.
worse.
uh
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I think, the discussion about corruption, about integrity, I think has been maybe, not as robust as it should be, because COVID has just like completely taken the attention of
Yeah.
so many people, understandably so. And I think this is a matter of concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I hope that one day we get to where we want, but easier said than done.
Yes.
So we go
Mm-hmm.
to another detail of this discussion, and it's the participation of women, Malaysian women, in the political life. And
Mm-hmm.
as you know, there's this tradition around the world, not just in Malaysia, of having women wings in each party, and they usually concentrated on these women wings, and they start becoming leaders of the women wings and speaking about women issues only, leaving the real discussion about the policies and the strategies of the party to the arena of men, and the men are the only ones who eventually become the leaders of the party.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this? And should we just eliminate these women wings altogether? or just, correct the way they're operating?
Mm. Yeah, so this is a good question, right? Because I feel like women's wings can be a double-edged sword. So on one
Mm-hmm.
hand, I realize the need or the importance for women's wings simply because politics has been dominated so extensively by men over
Yeah.
so many decades that if we didn't have women's wings, I think it would probably be a lot more difficult than it is already now for women
Mm-hmm.
to then take that first step into the
Mm-hmm.
political arena. So I think in one hand it does have its purpose, and I recognize that it is and the history of women's wings in Malaysia, especially in a party like UMNO, it does have a long history, because women were also involved in the fight for independence, for example, and then
Yeah.
they are then the pioneers of women's wings in political parties, for example. So there is quite a significant history to it. But on the other hand, I also feel like women's wings can then sort of trap women as well in
Yeah.
just within the wing, and then what happens is the women in the party then become the head of the women's wings,
Yeah.
but they do not then get the chance to hold senior party positions, like I can't
Secretary
imagine a
generals.
woman.
Yeah.
I can imagine a woman running for president of a party, for example,
Yeah.
simply because I think politics is just so male dominated, and the politics and business networks that are so deeply entrenched in Malaysia is very male dominated. Access to funding is very difficult, and of course, sexism, I think, in Malaysian politics is still
A
really
thing.
really
Yeah.
rampant. Yes, and you see, like, for example, in our parliament, where women MPs then uh are the victims of sexist slurs and misogynistic comments, which
Mm-hmm.
often go unpunished, right? And
Yeah.
uh there are just unrealistic expectations for women to raise families and also to have a political career at the same time, simply because gender roles is still so entrenched in our culture. So women are still seen as primarily the people, the ones responsible for childcare in
Housewives,
within the
basically.
home.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Household chores and all of that. So all of these challenges exist, right? And I think the way forward, I think, is really to really open up space and possibilities for women as much as possible, uh without using these sort of these categorizations within parties, like, oh, this is just for women, because as you rightly mentioned earlier, it then turns into, oh, women will only talk about women's issues,
Yeah.
and not be included in other issues as well. And I think this is really prevalent even in political campaigns. You will see that women actually play a very very important role at the grassroots level, to gain support at the grassroots level from people in the village, people in the sort of the residential areas.
Yeah.
But again, you women are then boxed into these roles where you do the cooking, or you do, like, wrapping presents, and those kinds of women roles, but things like talking about policies and the economy,
They don't do
and
that. Yeah.
governance. Yeah, women are not given that space. Those spaces are still dominated by men. So I do think that, although I think women's wings have played that role in giving women that space to enter politics, but I
Mm-hmm.
think the I guess the disadvantages has outweighed, I think, the advantages right now, especially in 2021. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there's some people who would say that, don't you think it's rather befitting for a democracy to just focus on enabling more qualified and well-intentioned individuals to succeed in politics regardless of
Mhm.
gender? Like this women men think, isn't this, aren't we done with this? this is just not just in Malaysia, but worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I completely agree with you, right? Because I think, uh, a democracy that is truly inclusive, um, is supposed to uplift and listen to the voices of everyone, regardless of
Yeah.
gender, religion, race, and all of that. And that is absolutely right. However, I do think that women also do experience issues and problems differently than men, right? So for example, because the sort of the demarcation of gender roles is still
Mm-hmm.
so uh it's very difficult to break out of that mindset of what a man's job is, what a women's job is, and women tend to then be overburdened with household chores and family caring.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a difference in the experience that men and women face, and I think these differences are also, it can be quite systemic, right? Because I think
Yeah.
in Malaysia now, there has been, I think, some discourse about paying for care work. So for example, stay-at-home moms should
Mm-hmm.
receive some stipend for their work in within the home. So recognizing care work within the home as being an economic activity, and women should be compensated for that, for example. So I do think there are different experiences that men and women face, and those need to be taken into account when we're talking about democracy and politics. Because if we don't, then I think that there is a risk that women might be left behind even more because of that. So I mean, there are many
Mm-hmm.
ways to do this. There are some countries that implement a quota, right? A thirty
Yeah.
percent quota in parliament, for example, for women. 30% quota for candidates in
What do you
for
think about
women.
that? Because a lot of people, they just end up filling in that quota and having unqualified people, and then that's it.
That's
What do
right.
you think
Yeah.
about
So
that?
yeah, so quotas are
Yeah.
also quite complicated, because I think especially in Malaysia, what tends to happen is, if we have a quota, uh the quota then becomes the target, right? So for example, okay, we have 30% of women in something, like in the board of a company, or in a political
Yeah.
candidate or whatever. Then we just stop there because we have the 30%, so it's done, right? So but
Exactly. Yeah.
that's not the right attitude to take, because the 30% is supposed to be a tool. So quotas are supposed to be a tool for you. It's not the goal, it's not the end goal, but I think
It's like the
quotas then
minimum. Yeah.
yes. So as long as we've achieved that 30%, that means that, oh, okay, we've done a really great job. When actually we haven't addressed all the other systemic issues that are preventing women from occupying these spaces. And also, I mean, even within politics, right? Like before even talking about quotas, I think what we need to ask ourselves is, can you imagine a woman being a political leader first, right? So, for example, I would like to ask Malaysians, like, can you imagine a woman being prime minister of the country,
Can
right?
they?
If in your imagination a woman can never be a prime minister of our country, then I think quotas are not going to be much use.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
quotas are supposed to be a tool, but I
Mhm.
think I what my fear is that it just end up being a target that everyone just aspires to, and then it just doesn't fulfill its purpose. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. I see. Okay,
Yeah.
this is really getting very interesting. So, as an outsider, as someone who's not from Malaysia, I actually noticed something, and correct me if I'm wrong. So, I noticed that several names of the Malaysian political parties, like UMNO, for example, United Malays National Organization, they're actually
Hmm.
aligned with certain ethnicities within Malaysia, even if it's the biggest ethnicity, but it doesn't make them as inclusive as they should be to the other ethnicities. And we know that Malaysia is not just about one ethnicity. So,
Hmm.
Is my impression correct? And if so, how does this serve democracy in the country?
Yeah, so one of the long-standing fundamental issues in Malaysian politics is precisely this, which is race-based political parties, right? So UMNO is not
Mm-hmm.
the only one. So UMNO represents the Malays, and then we also have Chinese parties like the Malaysian Chinese
Yeah.
Association and Malaysian Indian Congress (MIC) that represents the Indians, and even in the opposition we have the DAP, the Democratic Action Party, which in theory it's a multiracial party, so it doesn't prohibit non-Chinese people from joining, but just by composition, it is so dominant. Chinese
Yeah.
are so dominant in the party that it's almost like a Chinese party, right? So, and we have PAS, of course, the Islamic Party of Malaysia, which obviously is only for Muslims. So this is one of the biggest long-standing issues, I think, in Malaysian politics. And in every conference, in every forum that we have, we're always discussing this. What is our race-based political party still relevant? What is the way forward? How do we then get multiracial parties? Blah blah blah. So this has been such a huge issue, and um I mean, and I think Malaysians are probably, there are probably two main sides to the argument. So there's one side,
Mm-hmm.
or there's one half that says Malaysia needs to move on from these race-based parties, and we need to have multiracial, multicultural political parties that represent all the interests of all Malaysians and not
Mm-hmm.
just certain races, right?
Yeah.
Because that's just more inclusive. It's more in line with what's happening in the world today. Diversity representation is so important. And then there's the other side of the argument that
Yeah.
says um, the interest of every racial group in Malaysia are different. So that's why we need parties to cater to certain demands, certain interests from each racial community,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to, when you win elections, then to win elections you need to get into coalitions, basically, with
True.
parties that represent different communities. So there are two, I think, sides to the argument. And this is, I think, the perennial problem, I think, in Malaysian politics. And
What are the
of
percentages
course,
of these
yeah, I
two
mean,
arguments?
that's quite difficult, I think, to say. I don't think there's been a, like, some large scale survey that's been done
Yeah.
to ask this question. But I think, but we can see certain patterns, right? We can see
Okay.
certain patterns where Malaysians who are probably a bit more religiously conservative will most probably support the race-based parties political model,
Mm-hmm.
because they are concerned that the interest of their own race needs to be represented. And you will there is also another pattern where you'll probably see Malaysians who have a more cosmopolitan upbringing, who
Yeah.
are exposed to I don't know, I guess, to worldly affairs and issues, are probably a bit more progressive and would
Yeah.
support a multiracial, diverse political model. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I think those are the two, and it's really difficult to say, because when Pakatan Harapan won in 2018, many progressive Malaysians were very happy, because that was a more multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition, and the government was also more multiracial. But as we saw in 2020, when that government fell,
Mm-hmm.
many of the reasons that were then put forward for the you know for the reason that government fell was because the interest of the Malay Muslim majority community was not properly taken into
Taken
account.
into account.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that brought their downfall, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so now we are seeing UMNO back in power, and many have said that, oh, okay, now the interests of the Malay Muslims are then more taken care of. Although this remains to be seen, because I think in Malaysia, when any party comes into government, they are then forced to take a more moderate position on many things, because they know
Mm-hmm.
that they can't just rely on the support of one race or one community. So
Absolutely.
you yeah, so I think these are the contentions, I think, currently. And yeah, and for me, this is probably, the number one problem that needs to be, that we need to have an honest conversation about it. But it's very, very difficult. It gets very emotive, and people tend to,
People's
feel very
emotions are
strongly
involved.
about it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I
Yeah.
think a healthy sign is that you are having this conversation, which is good, at least for a starter. Yeah.
Yes,
All right.
exactly.
So, as a Malaysian citizen, this is my last question. How do you see the
Mhm.
future of democracy in Malaysia, and what changes in the democratic structure and constitution would you like to propose?
So for me, I would like to see uh Malaysian politics move to a more policy oriented politics. Right now, we are still obsessed with race, religion, personalities, and also money politics. I think money has become such a big part of our politics, and this leads then to corruption, abuse of power, and many other problems. So for me, I would like to really see that transition to policy oriented, issue based politics, and we need to leave behind this politics of race, religion, personalities, and money. um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is really important, because if we get stuck in this politics of the very divisive race, religious, money, personality politics, I think it is very difficult for Malaysia to catch up with our neighbors, with the rest of the world, where and how do we then face the contemporary problems facing our world today, if we are still stuck in those boxes. So for me, I would like to
Mm-hmm.
see that. And what kind of changes, structural, constitutional changes we need. I mean, there are so many, right? And I think where we can start is probably, and this is what ideas is trying to do, which is what we talked about earlier, political financing. We need to
Yeah.
make that more transparent, so that Malaysians know where their politicians get money from. It sounds quite simple, but it's not. And also, secondly, I think I would like to see changes in our parliament. How do we make our parliament, more than just a rubber stamp for laws, but to be an actual institution where, the voices of our MPs are heard, and where
Men and women.
laws and policies, both men and women, exactly,
Yeah.
and where laws and policies can be debated upon in depth, and in real, and have real substance to that, because
Mm-hmm.
parliament is such an important reflection of society, I think. So those
Absolutely.
so yeah, so that is my hope, for our politics going forward.
Okay. Hopefully, in our next discussion, some of these steps would be achieved. All right,
Hopefully.
Ira, thank you
Yeah.
very much for joining me in our Island Talk Show, and for being the first woman to join me as a guest. Looking forward to
Thank
having more
you.
discussions with you in the future, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed this discussion. Thank you very much, Ira. See you soon.
Thank you, Tasnim.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.